Tonight, the archive opens 4 of its most disturbing recovered case files. Case File 1. It was 10:31 when my phone buzzed.
Emergency alert. Do not enter underground structures, such as basements. Stay above ground until the all clear.
My husband looked up from his phone and stared at me. Did you just get a... Yeah. That's creepy, I said, glancing at the stairs. Our kid had fallen asleep for the night about an hour ago. What do you think's going on? I don't know, he replied. Could it be like a gas leak? Radon or something? We had a radon pump in our basement since we moved here. Maybe there was some weird influx of it or something. I ran up the stairs to check on our 5-year-old daughter as Luke flicked on the TV. Grace was sleeping peacefully, her blanket wrapped around her. I made sure she was breathing, comfortable, totally fine before heading back downstairs. When I did, Luke was glued to the TV, which said the same thing. Black screen, pixelated white letters, blocky colors jittering along the top and bottom of the screen.
Emergency alert. Do not enter underground structures.
Maybe we should get out of here, I said. But it's late. Grace has school tomorrow. Yeah, so? We'll miss school. We can go to my mom's. Luke crossed his arms and stared at the TV. He then flicked to CNN and other news channels, but whatever was happening here must have been local, because it was just the same political drivel re-airing from earlier in the day. There was not a blip of this emergency alert anywhere, except the local news channel. I pulled out my phone and did a Google search. Nothing came up, so I shot off a text to Lacey, the mom of one of Grace's friends, who lived in the next development over. We'd only lived here since the school year started, so it's not like I had a whole network of people to ask. She didn't respond. I think we should go, I said, grabbing a duffel bag out of the closet. What about work? Don't you work remotely on Mondays anyway? Yeah, but... I walked over to our basement door. The chain was latched. I hurried into the kitchen, opened a drawer, and pulled out some postal tape. What are you doing? If it's radon or something, I don't want that stuff all over our house, I said, crouching along the bottom and taping the crack under the door. I think they'd evacuate us if that were the case. I look up at him as I yank another long piece of tape off the roll. Okay, so what do you think it is? He shrugged. When I'd taped all the cracks, I brought the duffel bag upstairs, filled it with a few random outfits for me and Grace, along with my laptop and a few of her favorite dolls. Then I grabbed the cooler and loaded our leftover pasta and yogurts into it. Within 10 minutes, I was ready to go out the door. I'll pack up the car. Can you grab Grace? I asked. Luke went upstairs. I walked down the driveway, weighed down with the bags. It was chilly, clear night. Stars twinkled high above me. The street was exceedingly quiet, the tall, scraggly pines of the surrounding pine barrens stretching up to the sky. I heard the echoes of a dog barking somewhere. If everyone got the alert, wouldn't there be more people deciding to leave? I glanced at the house across the street. It was completely dark, except for the light above the garage that flicked on when I came out of the house. I opened the back hatch and threw our stuff in. Luke came out after, carrying Grace, wrapped up in blankets. She blinked sleepily. I strapped her in, Luke grabbed some stuff, and then we were pulling out of the driveway, on the road to my mom's house, an hour away. She fell back asleep, I told Luke, watching her face flick into view with the light of the passing street lamps. Good. My phone buzzed. I reached for it.
Emergency alert. Your phone's GPS indicates that you are leaving city limits. We do not recommend evacuating. Please return home and stay above ground.
What the fuck? I whispered. What? Luke asked. There's another alert. It's saying it knows we're leaving. It's tracking our GPS, and it's telling us to stay. Luke glanced at my phone. Seriously? Yeah. That data's supposed to be private, he he said. Isn't it? I would think so, unless, I don't know, maybe there are some emergency protocols that allow the FBI to access it or something. We fell into an uncomfortable silence. Luke clicked on the turn signal, switched lanes. You don't want me to turn around, right? He asked quietly. I glanced down at my phone. No, I don't. The highway was empty, not a single car in sight. That made me uneasy. Surely other people would be evacuating, unless they were all actually obeying the second message. But who even trusts the government these days? I did another Google search. No results popped up. I refreshed over and over again. Wouldn't something be on the internet by now? We were 5 miles out of town now. I should be relieved, but I wasn't. I leaned against the window, the cold glass pressed against my forehead. The pine trees flashed by, skinny and tilted, then gave way to charred barren patch of forest. Both sides of the highway were burnt to the ground. I'd read somewhere that some pine cones only opened in extreme temperatures, like from a wildfire. Fires and regrowth were a part of the cycle here, part of the ecosystem, in flux between death and rebirth like a phoenix. My phone buzzed. My heart dropped. But it wasn't an alert. It was a text from Lacey. Only 2 words. What alert? My fingers raced across the screen. Didn't you get an emergency alert, saying to stay above ground? No. Lacey didn't get an alert, I said. Luke paused. What? What if the alerts were only sent to our phones? I asked, my voice shaking. I glanced back at Grace, still peacefully asleep, head lolling softly with each bump of the car. Luke shook his head. That's crazy. No one can send messages like that. Just the government or whatever. What if it's a trap? My voice shook harder. What if the only safe place was our basement? That's just your OCD talking, he said softly, empathetically. We're doing the right thing. There's something weird in town, like a gas leak, and we got out. That's obviously the safest thing to do. I stared out at the charred pines. There were a few that hadn't burnt up, standing tall and stilted in the darkness. I stared out at them, wondering why they were spared. One of them moved. What the The car screeched to a stop. My body lurched forward, the seatbelt locked, keeping my head from hitting the dash. Sorry, that deer, it just darted. His voice died in his throat. We both stared at the lower legs of something illuminated in the headlights, thin and spinely, but definitely not a deer's. They ended in twisted toes, not hooves, and extended several feet up into the darkness. Silhouetted against the starry sky, beyond the reach of our headlights, I could see something tall and spindly, skeletal, crisscrossing lines of bones or sticks, or something else entirely. As I stared at it, as it stared at me, a wave of dizziness washed through me. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, weight pressed down on my head, an immense pressure, bearing down on me. Thwack! Something hit the side of the car with incredible force. The entire car rocked on its wheels. I screamed. Thwack! A mess of lines, bones, sticks outside my window, empty air between them, the stars and the pines rippling strangely behind it. Luke stomped down on the accelerator. The car shot forward. We swerved around the thing, then past the burnt section of the forest and continued down the dark, twisting highway. My phone buzzed.
Emergency alert. All clear. Please return home immediately.
We got to my mom's house around midnight, a squat brick ranch on a residential road. I glanced warily at the pines behind her house, stretching up to the sky, before picking up Grace and carrying her inside. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for us, her fingers wrapped against the mug in her hand. The entire house smelled like that of a familiar mix of coffee in dust. I started for the guest bedroom, but then got a better idea. The ranch had a lower level that was half underground. It had been finished into an office, but there was a couch down there. I could have Grace sleep on the couch, and we could sleep on the floor. "Where are you going?" Mom was standing behind me, eyebrow raised, as I undid the chain lock on the basement floor. "I think we're going to sleep down here." "No, you're not. It's all dusty down there. I haven't cleaned for ages. There could even be mice, and we're sleeping down here." "Those alerts were probably just pranks," she continued, "or a glitch or something. Besides, you're like an hour away now." I'd only told Mom about the alerts. I didn't tell her about the thing in the woods. My mom was not a supernatural person. She'd definitely chalk it up to a trick of the light or something. Casper himself could be floating in front of her face, and she'd call it a trick of the light. "You're being ridiculous," she continued. "You know, this reminds me of the time you taped up the door in the attic. Remember? When the exterminator had found a bat up there? You were worried that there were more, with rabies, and they could flatten themselves through the cracks between the door and the ceiling and bite you while you were sleeping. You don't feel the bites when you're sleeping," I growled back. "A lot of people have gotten rabies from bats in their houses, and they can squeeze through really tiny places. My point is," she interrupted, "it's unsanitary down there." Grace was getting incredibly heavy in my arms. I glanced at Luke, who was just standing in the doorway, wide-eyed, like he'd walked in on a gunfight. Then I pulled the chain lock and yanked the door open. "Kate," Mom said warningly. Halfway down the stairs, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I got Grace settled on the couch, then pulled it out.
Emergency alert. Your phone's GPS indicates you have stopped in New Jersey. Disobeying an emergency alert is a federal offense. Please return home and stay above ground.
I lifted my phone to show Luke, who was coming down behind me. His face looked ghastly pale in the white light. Mom was right behind him and craned her neck to read the alert too. "Oh, that's BS," she said. "It's not a federal offense, it's a state offense. And that would be an evacuation order, for like a hurricane or something." She shook her head. "You know what this sounds like? One of those scammers. I got a call from someone claiming to be my grandson." "It's not a scam," Luke interrupted without elaborating. Then he worked in silence, putting the blanket over Grace, getting her comfortable. I flicked on the light and checked for mouse droppings, but I didn't see any. "I'll get the rest of our stuff," he said, leaving my mom and I alone. I glanced around. The office stuff was in the leftmost corner, the desk covered with papers and a single photo of my dad. He'd been gone almost 7 years now, and it seemed like every year, more and more of his stuff got tucked away, moved downstairs, shoved into storage. I swallowed down the feeling and glanced around the rest of the room. The door next to the desk led to an unfinished storage area. On the other end of the basement was a sliding glass door that led out to the backyard. I didn't like that at all. We were technically underground, where we stood, but the rightmost corner of the door was above ground. Did that mean we were still vulnerable? Those things couldn't fit through the glass door, I thought, but they couldn't fit through a normal door either, and apparently we wouldn't have been safe in our own home. I stared out the glass door, afraid I might see one of them out there. Maybe this was a bad idea, to stay here. We were an hour away, sure, but the pines were still right at our door. Not officially the Pine Barrens, but the surrounding Pinelands ecosystem, which was almost the same thing. If those things came from the Barrens, they were only in the burned areas, I reminded myself. I imagined a pine cone, spiraling in midair, petals opening as fire raged around it, and skeletons made of sticks prying their way out of the thing, creeping along the ground, stretching and growing toward the sky. Were there any maps of the burned areas? I pulled up Google Maps, looking for the blackened areas, but the information would be out of date, wouldn't it? My phone buzzed. I expected another alert, but it was a text from Lacey instead. My My friend Rochelle got the same alert you did, by the way. It read, "Super weird." My heart dropped. Did Rochelle, whoever she was, listen to it? "Tell her not to listen to the alert," I started typing. "It's a trap." Then I realized how unhinged that sounded. I didn't even know Lacey that well. I thought for a second, then typed a new message. "Can you give me her number? I want to ask her about it." Pretty weird that it targeted both of us, no one else. "Sure, let me ask her," was the reply. As I waited, Luke came back downstairs carrying our stuff, computer cords and stuffies nearly falling out of his arms. "Someone else got the alert," I whispered. "One of Lacey's friends." "Really?" "Yeah, I asked for her number." A minute later, the number came in. I dialed it immediately. On the third ring, she picked up. "Hello?" "Hi, this is Kate, Lacey's friend," I started awkwardly. "We got the emergency alert too, but we think it's a trap. There's something off about it." A pause. "But it came from the government," she replied. "How could it be a trap? It seems like no one else is getting it. When alerts are sent out like that, they're sent to all phones in certain locations. It doesn't make sense." "Yeah, I don't know. It's weird." Another pause. "Well, we were just about to head to bed here, so I'd better go." "Wait, I think the basement is safe, and everywhere else isn't," I said quickly. "I think somebody is trying to lure people into staying above ground." "Okay, maybe," she said, unconvincingly. "Look, I gotta go. Sorry." A few seconds later, the call ended. Well, shit. "She didn't believe me," I said, looking up at Luke, my lip trembling. "She, and her kids, and her family, they're all going to—" "You tried," he said, wrapping his arms around me. "That's the best you can do." I couldn't help it. I cried as we lay a blanket on the floor, got ready to sleep next to Grace. I looked down at her perfect little face, and then Luke and I snuggled under the blankets together.
Hey, kiddo.
I woke up with the start. For a second, I thought I was in my own bed, but then the roughness of the carpet, the aching in my back, brought me back to reality. My father's voice, rough and warm, lingered from the dream. I could almost feel his arms around me, the summer sunlight beating down on us, as we played at the creek behind the house. I rolled over to check on Grace. Her eyes were wide open. She was staring behind me, at the sliding glass door. Slowly, she raised a hand and pointed over my shoulder. I turned around. There was something twisting and turning, contorting itself, trying to get in through the sliding glass door, like a dog through a cat door. It did it silently, except for a low clicking sound, like the popping of joints. All the blood drained from my face. Dark, sinewy legs, like spider legs, twisting and turning in the moonlight, squeezing itself ever so slowly through the hole it made. I now saw the shattered glass scattering the floor. I grabbed Luke and shook him. "Luke!" The thing fell still. I couldn't see eyes or a face, but I felt it in my gut. It was staring at me. Dizziness swept over me. I stumbled forward, losing my balance. It was like I was standing on the deck of a boat. The ground seemed to shift and tilt underneath me. I just wanted to lie down until the world stopped turning. "No!" I screamed internally. "You can't let that thing get Grace!" I glanced around the room, looking for something that could be used as a weapon. Anything. "Go in there," I said to Grace, pointing to the storage room, or at least I thought it was. Everything was tilting and moving around me. "Go! Hide!" I stumbled forward, but all the colors were bleeding together now. Everything was hazy as a dream. My father was standing in front of me, standing there in the basement, but his face was all wrong. His eye drooped out of his socket, like something had squeezed his skull. His grin was crooked.
"Hey, kiddo,"
he said in a voice that sounded off-key. Nausea filled me. I started vomiting, warm liquid down my shirt, splashing on my feet. My dad, not dad, stood tilted, like gravity had suddenly changed. One arm was too long and hung limply from its socket.
"I miss you so much."
"Stop," I sobbed. "Please stop."
"Come with me. We can be a family again."
"Stop."
"I never got to meet Grace. Wouldn't it be so wonderful for me to finally meet her?"
The world tilted and shifted. I stared at my father, his left eye drooping like jelly, his crooked smile, his gaunt face, his limp arms. I opened my mouth. Hot pain shot up my shoulder. I fell to my knees instantly. I tried to cry out, to say stop again, to tell Grace to run for her life, but all that came out was a scream of pain, and another, and another. When I finally opened my eyes, the world had stopped tilting. Luke was dragging me across the floor, back from the glass door. Grace was peeking out of the storage area, terrified. I touched my shoulder, stinging with pain. My fingers came away red. It bit me. I'm dying. What? My phone began to ring. Shaking all over, I reached into my pocket and pulled it out. I recognized the number. It was Rochelle. "You're right," she said breathlessly. No preamble. "What?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "About the alert. My husband, he has some friends who work with cell phones and stuff. And She took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. "They traced the signal. It's not coming from the government or the town hall or whatever." I chewed my lip, held my breath. "It's coming from the middle of the woods." The hospital was mostly empty. Quiet, dark. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the walls were a sickly shade of seafoam green. The doctor, a tall, thin man in his 60s, didn't seem to believe my story, but he admitted me for observation anyway. My mom was staying at her friend's house with Grace, in their non-walkout basement. I didn't want to leave her. I wanted her right here, with me, but the hospital was above ground, and someone needed to treat my wound before I bled to death. Luke left me for a moment to use the bathroom. I closed my eyes, not intending to sleep, but I was so tired, and the bite was now only a dull, throbbing pain. I drifted in and out of consciousness, until I heard two voices in the room. I snapped my eyes open for a moment to see the doctor and a nurse hovering over me. They were talking softly to each other, looking concerned. I quickly shut my eyes again, pretending to be asleep. I caught a snatch of their conversation. "It's just like that man," the nurse whispered. "The one that was admitted last night. John something." A pause. "I know. What do you think this is?" "I don't know, Rita. I really don't." "Do you think we should give her diazepam, preventatively?" the nurse asked. "The other one, he screamed so much." "The family will ask questions. There's no reason for her to be on diazepam for an animal bite. They'll ask questions when she's dead, too," the nurse snapped back. "The least we can do is make her comfortable." Oh, shit. I didn't open my eyes, but I jumped when the nurse said dead. I now could feel both of them looking at me, their eyes boring through my closed lids. "Let's talk somewhere else," the doctor said. Hurried footsteps on tile, and then nothing. I opened my eyes. I'm going to die? I don't know how long I lay there, wallowing in my own misery, but footsteps jolted me awake. Luke was walking back in. "How's the pain now?" "Bad." I told him what I had overheard, my voice quavering. "That doesn't mean anything," he said, but I could hear the concern in his voice. "We're going to get you out of here, and everything's going to go back to normal. The mayor or whatever will release some statement about a faulty alert system and stop. He looked at me warily, but shut up. The two of us sat in silence. A few times Luke opened his mouth, looking like he was going to say something, but then quickly shut it again. Footsteps pattered by outside in the hallway. The tinny sounds of the TV droned on in the corner. "I'm going to call Rochelle," I told him. The line rang 3 times before she picked up. I told her everything, about the bite, about the things I saw. I was afraid of sounding crazy, but when I'd finally finished, she sounded like she was crying on the other side. "I saw my baby," she said in a low tone, barely above a whisper. I had a miscarriage at 14 weeks, and I saw this little basket with a tiny pink thing bundled up inside, and I heard her cry. Her voice broke. I knew it wasn't real, but I still went toward it, before Ravi pulled me back. "I'm so sorry," I said, the phone trembling in my hands. "Thank you. But it didn't hurt you, right? Bite you? Claw you?" "No, I don't think so." The silence stretched out between us. "So what do we do?" I asked. "Just run from it? Forever?" "I've been talking to someone who knows about this more than we do," she replied. "Maybe I should come see you. What hospital are you at?" She told me she'd be there in an hour. Rochelle was a short, thin woman with brown skin and thick frame glasses. She wore a t-shirt with some sort of video game reference on it and faded jeans. As she hurried in, she was wringing her hands, twisting them over and over again. Following after her was a woman in her 50s. Her salt and pepper hair was cropped short, and her skin was deathly pale, like she'd never seen the sun. "This is Jamie," Rochelle said, gesturing to the older woman. "She's a professor and specializes in this kind of stuff. I've been talking to her for the past few hours, and she wanted to see you." "This kind of stuff?" The woman abruptly sat down and leaned in towards me, like I was some kind of specimen she was eager to examine. "You know what's going on here?" I asked, as she stared at my shoulder in a way that made me extremely uncomfortable. "Yes, sort of. Have you ever heard of something called speculative evolution?" "No," I replied. "Okay. It's reconstructing what kinds of creatures would evolve under different circumstances. Maybe an amphibian would evolve to have wings like a bat, for example, if insects didn't hover around ponds. You see what I mean?" I guess. We also try to construct what animals might look like millions of years from now, or humans. What kind of things will evolve under pressure of modern humanity, modern technology? There's already some sort of it happening. The bedbugs in New York are hundreds of times more resistant to pesticides than the ones in Florida are. Deer are more skittish than they were 10 years ago, because cars kept hitting them. Okay. I had no idea where she was going with this. "You haven't seen that image of what humans would look like if they were evolved to survive car crashes? The man has, no neck and lots of fat to cushion the impact." "No." "Okay." She shook her head. "The point is, some people in this field believe that at some point, creatures would evolve abilities that mimic technology, like birds that look like drones, or bats that can sense electromagnetic fields. Who's to say this thing that you and Rochelle have described hasn't evolved the ability to send out radio signals? Heck, our entire mobile system." "That's ridiculous," Luke interjected. "So what? This creature is texting? In English?" No, nothing like that. States, local governments, they often have pre-programmed emergency messages, like a protocol for hurricanes, earthquakes, nuclear threats, etc. This thing, it just hacked a signal to send a particular protocol. Same thing with Rochelle," she said, looking sympathetically at her. "We're all sending little electromagnetic signals in our brains, all the time. Neural impulses. Sharks, 400 million-year-old living fossils, can detect them. These things, they can hack them. So, when I saw my dad, I glanced at Luke. That thing was hacking my brain signals? Jamie nodded. It's a little more complicated than that. I believe this thing sends out a chemical in the air, too, at close range that messes with some of the neurotransmitters. But essentially, yes. Okay, but why is the basement safe then? Because it's too big to get down there? Luke asked. I'm glad you asked, Jamie replied, with a big, victorious smile on her face, like she was just about to tell us the secret to the universe. They chose that emergency protocol, with the basement, because their abilities don't work if you're underground. Just how your phone reception goes out when you're underground. A heavy silence filled the room. Luke and I looked at each other. For one, this sounded pretty out there. Conspiracy theory level stuff. More unbelievable than Roswell. On the other hand, nothing I'd experienced in the past 24 hours made sense. How do you know all of this? I asked. This isn't the first time this has happened, she replied, her face grim. Almost 10 years ago, the same thing happened, out by Woodland, on the border of the Wharton State Forest. I studied it then, too, but there weren't as many of them. Okay, but the text didn't get sent to everyone, Luke said. Only us and Rochelle so far, that we know of. Right. So, these things, I call them stickmen, by the way. They only target people with overactive imaginations, people who send out really clear, strong brain signals. It's easier for them to find you, and it's easier for them to hack your brain. They're not actually producing the image you see of your deceased loved ones or whatever. They're just knocking it loose from your memory, from something you've imagined. If you've imagined your kid dying 1,000 times because you have anxiety or OCD, that makes it all the easier for them to use it against you and lure you in. And, of course, there's more for them to eat. More for them to eat? Yeah, they eat brains. I mentioned that, didn't I? More awkward, heavy, suffocating silence. Kate said she heard the doctor saying she was going to die, he said in a soft voice. Is that true? Jamie glanced at me, but stayed silent. Rochelle jumped in, her voice full of heartache. Jamie told me, once it bites you, it's linked to you. It will follow you, and end you. It'll show you your worst nightmares first, Jamie interjected, absolutely unable to read the room. Show you everything you fear, but when it starts showing you yourself, in these waking nightmares, that usually means you only have a day left. I swallowed a wave of nausea. Then I started to get out of the hospital bed. I needed to get out of here, away from Jamie's stare, Luke's concern. Just a moment of silence. Maybe I'd get a Coke from the vending machine, not even a diet one. I hadn't had a full sugar one in ages. I tried to keep out the memory of my dad before me, in my mom's basement. I had imagined him saying those exact words, when I was at my lowest point years ago, when a flicker of suicide showed itself in an ocean of postpartum depression. And that fucker, that stick man or whatever, had used it against me. Another wave of nausea. I pushed towards the door. Wait, Rochelle said, standing up, reaching for my arm. I'll be right back, I snapped. I made my way down the empty hospital hallway, beeping machines, echoey footsteps in the distance. Tears pricked my eyes. I kept going, making a left, then a right, following the signs for the vending machines. My feet shuffled along the ground, taking me there slowly, ever so slowly. Kate, stop! I turned to see Luke coming after me. He stopped 6 feet away, trying to give me space. I just need a minute, I replied, my voice shaky. No, it's not that. Your mom just texted me, and we have to go. Grace. His voice broke. My heart broke with it. What? What happened? She fell, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She's not conscious. They're rushing her to the hospital. To the hospital? You mean here? They're taking her here? I asked frantically. They're taking her to the hospital, he repeated. Something twinged inside me. That doesn't make sense. That's not an answer. I looked down. No. On the floor, something black, slick, and wet. On the green linoleum floor, a tendril like a long umbilical cord attached to Luke's foot and leading down the hallway. I felt dizzy. The world started to tilt. Kate! I turned around to see Luke behind me, frozen, eyes wide. I looked back. Other Luke was no longer standing there. It was me. I was staring at my own face. I wished I could say it looked different. One eye popping out, skin all blistered and pink, but it wasn't. I looked exactly like me, like looking in a mirror. I looked down. Other me was holding a pillow. She held my gaze for a second, then looked down to the floor. I followed her gaze. Grace was lying at my feet, eyes closed, hands resting neatly under her head, fast asleep. No. I knew this intrusive thought. I knew how it ended. It's not real. I turned and ran back down the hallway, reaching for Luke's hand, rustling behind me. I couldn't look back. I couldn't. Luke pulled me into the room and I followed breathlessly. We have to get underground. It's here. Rochelle and Jamie looked at me. Then they looked at the floor. For a second, I thought I was going to see my worst nightmare, but instead, I looked down to see blood dripping off my arm, seeping through my shirt, traveling in wet, soaky rivulets, dripping to the floor. Drip, drip, drip. Jamie shot up and walked over to me. Gently, she pushed back the cloth of my shirt, exposing the wound on my shoulder. Necrotic tissue, she whispered. She shook her head sadly. It's begun. I can't die. I can't. My shoulder pulsed with pain. I continued running down the hall, towards the big red exit sign. The hospital hadn't released me. Stop, Luke begged, catching up with me, but I forced myself to run faster, despite the pain. I wasn't going to just sit in the hospital room and wait to die. Obviously, from what the doctor said, that's what happened to the last one. I was going to get underground. Maybe I would have to stay there forever, or until they found a way to kill these things. I would not leave Grace without a mother. I wanted more than anything to go to her, hug her, tell her I loved her. But maybe that thing could follow me, even into a basement. I didn't think so, but I couldn't risk it. The best thing I could do was get underground, buy time. Grace was as safe as she could be, with my mom underground. I ran towards the exit. The red sign glowed brightly in the darkness of the hallway. One of the lights flickered overhead. My bare feet slapped against the floor. The floor felt sharp. I kept running, but it didn't seem like I was getting any closer to the exit sign. What the? I glanced back. Luke wasn't following me anymore, nor Rochelle or Jamie. The hallway extended behind me, stretching back into the darkness infinitely. I kept running. The exit door was open now, still so far away. A stiff breeze blew in, ruffling through my hair. It smelt of pine and wood and decay. Keep running. The ground was so rough under my feet. The air was so cold. The lights above me flickered wildly. The door didn't get any closer, no matter how fast I sprinted. A few leaves swirled by outside in the darkness. Keep running. The lights above me flickered out, and then I wasn't in the hospital anymore. I was in the middle of the woods. Pine trees stretched into the darkness. The sand, littered with sharp sticks and rocks, bit into the bare soles of my feet. Silence rang in my ears, except for a light, fluttering sound somewhere in the darkness. No. It tricked me. I wheeled around. I didn't see any lights, any break in the trees. How deep in the barrens am I? How long have I been running? The darkness closed in, suffocating me. I felt my pockets. No phone. No way to call for help. No way to know where I am. I sucked in a breath, ready to scream into the darkness. But that would draw the stickmen to me, wouldn't it? Or did it not matter? Did they already know where I was? I looked up at the stars, at the slices of sky poking through the pines. I tried to identify them. Is that Cassiopeia? But I didn't know anything about how to tell directions from the stars. Besides, the pines blocked out most of the sky anyway. No, wait. That's not the way to do this. I ran in here. My legs didn't feel that sore. Even though it must have distorted time, I'd only felt like I'd been running for a minute. If I'd run 10 miles into the barrens, I'd know. I just needed to figure out what direction I'd come from. I wheeled around, trying to look for footprints, flattened vegetation, any sign of where I'd come from. But it was pitch dark out, and I didn't have any source of light. There was moonlight, enough to see so that I didn't smack into a tree, but not enough to look for footprints in the sand. I stared at the trees, but the branches were up too high and too thin to support my weight. I couldn't climb them to get a better vantage point. I ransacked my pockets again. Nothing, so I started off in a random direction. Sticks stabbed my feet. Pebbles rolled underneath my toes. I kept walking forward, trying to keep a straight line. The Pine Barrens is 1,000,000 acres, but an acre wasn't that many square miles. I remembered that from somewhere. I tried to focus on doing the math. If I was in the center, and I walked in a random direction, how long would it take me to get to the edge? 5 hours? 10? More than that? And of course, I'd heard the stories. Even without the stickmen, the Pine Barrens were deadly enough. Carnivorous plants, rattlesnakes, and a way of turning people around. It was easy to get lost in the infinite pines. I thought of Grace, Luke telling her I was gone, her crying, melting down. She needed me. Maybe years ago, at that low point in my life after Grace was born, I wouldn't have been quite so panicked at the thought of dying. But I was panicking now. I picked up the pace. Sticks stabbed at my feet harder. I tried to keep a straight line, but it was so hard in the dark, and for all I knew, I was just walking deeper and deeper into the barrens. Then I saw it. A clearing. My heart soared. That must be where I came from. It was one of the burned areas. The fire had hollowed out a large clearing. It was lit in silver tones by a nearly full moon, no longer obscured. Some pines still stood, completely bare of needles, skeletal and black. Ash blackened the pale sand beneath, the color of bone. A few pine saplings poked through the destruction, only inches tall. It was deathly silent. I'm never going to get out of here. I looked up at the blackened pines, stretching up to the sky like fingers. Snap! I whirled around. Someone was standing at the edge of the trees, painted in all tones of gray from the moonlight, barely visible among the trees. I took off in a run, but in my panic, I tripped. It felt like it was in slow motion. The sandy, ashy ground rose up to meet me. Pain shot up my arm. My shoulder screamed in pain. Sticks scraped my cheek. Snap, snap, snap. I scrambled up to see myself standing there, arms hanging limply at my sides, hair grazing my shoulders. "Let me go," I screamed. My voice echoed and died into the forest. She stepped closer. I could hear, too, a wet smacking sound. There was another slimy black appendage attached to her feet, controlling her, like she was a puppet. She canted her head at me, and her lips split into an unnatural grin. I turned and tried to run again. An intense wave of dizziness hit me. The ground tilted. Heaviness pressed down on my head. My stomach lurched and I was vomiting, stumbling, tripping in my own puddle of vomit. "Stop," I croaked. I was lying on my back, warm, wet vomit soaking through the back of my shirt. Twisted black appendages were filling up the corners of my vision, melting in with the twisting black pines stretching up to the sky. The stars above me looked like shooting stars, moving across the sky with how dizzy I was. The sky was replaced by my own face. Her hair hung onto my face, sticking to the sweat and the vomit. Her lips curled into a smile, and then her mouth began to open, wider, 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 rows of sharp teeth, like a lamprey's descending into the darkness of her throat. I tried to push it off, but my hands met slime. I was pinned by the creature, one of the stick men. It was only her disembodied head hovering over me, attached to a tangled black mess of creature. "They eat brains," Jamie's voice echoed in my head as the teeth loomed closer. So close, I couldn't see any of the barons anymore. Grace. What's she going to do without me? She'll never recover. Her entire life will be ruined. I can't. I'm so sorry. And then I realized. The stickmen were attracted to brain signals. What if I'd done something I'd never done before? What if I just stopped thinking? I closed my eyes, ignored the warm, rotting breath on my face, ignored the slime seeping through my shirt, ignored the thoughts of Grace. I used every last bit of my willpower to stop thinking. Nothing. A void. Non-existence. A clicking sound came from above me. The creature began to shift its weight. I continued thinking about nothing. Absolutely nothing. The creature pulled itself off me. When I opened an eye, it no longer wore my head. It was twisting and turning, making clicking sounds, lifting some of its appendages in the air, as if confused, as if it thought I'd escaped, and it was trying to sense me out again. I lay there in the dark, burnt forest, thinking of nothing for seconds, minutes, hours. It was the hardest thing I ever had done, pushing away thoughts of Grace, of my future, of hers, pushing it all out and being empty. When the sun began to rise, I pulled myself up. The burnt forest was bathed in the pink hues of dawn. My skin was covered in vomit and black slime. My shoulders still throbbed with pain, and there was no sign of the stickmen. It took me another few hours, but in the daylight, I was able to find my way back. After walking around in circles for a while, I caught a glimpse of a road through the trees. I'd apparently fled the hospital and run a half a mile into the Pine Barrens across the street. Luke and the hospital staff were looking for me all night. I was reunited with Grace, and it was the happiest day of my life. I think the stickman is still linked to me. We've been spending our nights in the basement, where we've been totally safe. Rochelle, Jamie, and I have been working together to figure out how to kill it for good. Some guy online, from the incident 10 years ago, claims drowning them works. But for now, I am content to be home and be safe, even if it isn't forever, and a million bad things are waiting to happen. Case File 2. I work the graveyard shift at a central emergency dispatch center for a major area. The hours between midnight and 6 in the morning do something terrible to the human mind. The rest of the world goes to sleep, and you are left sitting in a dark, heavily air-conditioned room, staring at a bank of glowing monitors, listening to the worst moments of people's lives. You deal with drunk drivers, domestic disputes, medical emergencies, and the deeply lonely people who just want to hear a voice in the dark. You learn to detach yourself and to follow the strict protocols established by the city. My training was brief. The supervisor handed me a thick binder of codes, showed me how to log into the routing software, and pointed me to a desk in the back corner of the room. The dispatcher who worked this specific desk before me had quit without giving any notice. He simply walked out in the middle of a Tuesday night shift and never came back. No one in the office liked to talk about him. When I sat down at the desk for the first time, I found a small yellow sticky note pressed firmly onto the lower bezel of the primary monitor. The handwriting was frantic, the letters pressed so hard into the paper that the pen had nearly torn through. The note contained a single, highly specific rule. If a caller speaks an undocumented clicking dialect and asks for a translator, transfer them to line 9, a dead line, and hang up immediately. I stared at the note for a long time. Dispatch centers receive calls from people speaking hundreds of different languages. We have an entire department dedicated to rapid translation services. We patch the calls through to the language line, a translator joins the channel, and we coordinate the emergency response. Transferring a desperate caller to a dead line and terminating the connection goes against every single ethical and professional regulation in the manual. I assumed the note was a dark, twisted joke left by an employee who had burned out from the stress of the job. I peeled the sticky note off the monitor and tossed it into the trash can under my desk. I worked the desk for 3 weeks without incident. The calls were routine. I drank terrible coffee, routed ambulances, and watched the clock slowly tick toward morning. The call came in on a Thursday night at exactly 3 in the morning. The digital console beeped sharply, indicating an incoming connection from a mobile device. I pressed the button on my headset to accept the call. 911, what is your emergency? I said, pulling up the blank entry form on my keyboard. The line was completely silent for a moment. There was no heavy breathing, no background traffic, no wind. The audio feed sounded incredibly sterile. Then, the clicking started. It was a rapid, rhythmic sequence of hard, wet sounds. It sounded exactly like the wet tissue of a tongue striking the back of a pallet, mixed with the sharp scraping of stones rubbing together. The clicks varied in pitch and speed, forming a complex, structured cadence that clearly functioned as a spoken language. I had handled calls involving rare dialects before, but this audio profile was entirely alien. It made the small hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Hello?" I said, keeping my voice steady. "I cannot understand you. Do you need police, fire, or medical assistance?" The clicking paused. A deep, heavily distorted voice spoke through the static. The voice sounded incredibly unnatural, as if multiple vocal cords were vibrating simultaneously to produce the English words.
Translator.
The voice rasped, the syllables dragging across the connection.
We need a translator.
A sharp jolt of adrenaline flooded my chest. I immediately remembered the crumpled yellow sticky note sitting at the bottom of my trash can. I moved my mouse across the screen, hovering the cursor over the manual transfer directory. I located line 9. My finger rested on the left mouse button. I was entirely prepared to click the transfer protocol and end the call. Before I could press the button, a new sound bled through the audio feed. It was a child, a young boy, crying softly in the background. His voice was incredibly clear, completely lacking the distortion of the primary caller. "Please," the child sobbed, his voice trembling with genuine terror. "Please help us. He is hurting my mom. I want to go home." My hand froze over the mouse. The professional detachment I relied on to survive the job completely evaporated. You cannot ignore a child in danger. I pulled my hand away from the mouse and brought my fingers to the keyboard. "I hear you," I said urgently, typing a command to force the routing software to ping the nearest cellular tower. "I am staying on the line. Can you tell me where you are?" The child did not answer. The deep, distorted voice returned to the channel, completely speaking over the crying boy.
You stayed,
the voice whispered. The clicking sounds erupted again, significantly louder and more aggressive this time, drowning out the background noise entirely. The wet scraping blasted through my headset, vibrating painfully against my eardrums. I stared at the location software on my primary monitor. The map was attempting to lock onto the signal, but the tracking radius was completely malfunctioning. The red perimeter circle bounced wildly across the city grid, stretching from the downtown all the way to the borders, entirely unable to pinpoint a stable coordinate. "Sir, you need to tell me your location," I demanded, ignoring the painful clicking sounds. "I am dispatching units, but I need an address." The static on the line spiked violently, producing a sharp, deafening screech of audio feedback. I ripped the headset off my ears, throwing it onto the desk. The call abruptly disconnected, and the timer on my screen reset to 0. I sat back in my chair, rubbing my temples. I tried to pull the archived call data to force a manual location trace, but the system registered the interaction as a corrupted file. There was no phone number attached to the record. There was no digital footprint. It was as if the call had never actually occurred within the routing software. I finished the remainder of my shift in a state of profound, lingering unease. I kept staring at the blank screen, waiting for the phone to ring again, but the console remained quiet. When 6 o'clock finally arrived, I gathered my belongings, clocked out of the system, and walked to my car in the empty parking lot. The environment of my daily life began to severely deteriorate that same evening. I live alone in a small ground-floor apartment on the outskirts of the city. I went home, locked the deadbolts, and tried to sleep to prepare for my next night shift. I lay in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, completely unable to settle my mind. The exhaustion weighed on my muscles, but my brain refused to power down. At roughly 2 in the afternoon, the ambient noise in my bedroom completely shifted. The low hum of the air conditioning unit pushing air through the ceiling vents stopped. The distant sound of traffic rolling down the avenue outside my window faded entirely into silence. A sharp, wet sound echoed from the dark hallway outside my bedroom door. It was the clicking, the exact same rapid sequence of scraping stones and wet tissue I had heard through the headset at the dispatch center, but it came from inside my home. I sat up slowly, pushing the blankets off my chest. I reached out to the bedside table and grabbed the flashlight I kept in the drawer. I engaged the beam, aiming the bright circle of light directly toward the open bedroom door. The hallway was filled with thick, unnatural shadows that seemed to actively resist the illumination of the flashlight. Something was shifting along the wall just outside my vision. I gripped the flashlight tightly and took a slow step toward the door. I aimed the beam directly into the center of the dark corridor. The thing occupying my hallway completely defied any logical biological structure. It was a massive, chaotic amalgamation of human anatomy and debris crawling slowly across the hardwood floorboards. The body of it consisted entirely of dozens of severed, heavily bruised human limbs. Arms and legs were brutally fused together in a shifting, rolling mass of rotting, discolored flesh. The limbs articulated randomly, dragging the heavy center of the thing forward with jerky, uncoordinated movements. Wrapped aggressively around the bruised limbs, binding the horrific anatomy together, were hundreds of yards of thick, unspooled copper telephone wire. The frayed, rusted copper dug deeply into the flesh, creating deep lacerations that wept a dark, thick fluid onto my floorboards. Spread randomly across the shifting mass of limbs were multiple human mouths. They completely lacked any supporting facial features. They were simply torn, ragged lips and teeth embedded directly into the bruised skin. Every single mouth was opening and closing in perfect unison, producing the deafening, rapid, clicking dialect. I stood completely paralyzed in the bedroom doorway, my mind aggressively rejecting what I am seeing. The creature slowly oriented its massive rolling bulk directly toward my position. The copper wires scraped violently against the floorboards as it pulled itself forward. My survival instinct finally shattered the paralysis. I threw the flashlight directly at the shifting mass of limbs. The cylinder struck the creature, producing a sharp, wet thud, and rolled away into the dark. I turned around, sprinted blindly toward the bedroom window, unlatched the glass pane, and threw myself completely out of the ground floor opening. I hit the landscaping bushes outside, scrambled frantically to my feet, and ran down the street until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to collapse. I spent the rest of the day sitting in the back corner of a crowded diner, drinking endless cups of black coffee, entirely terrified to return to my apartment. I knew I could not simply run away. That thing was tied to the call I stayed in. I needed to understand what happened and what is the meaning of that call and the note. I waited until the sun went down and drove my car back to the dispatch center. I used my employee access card to enter the building before my shift began. The room was mostly empty during the shift changeover. I sat at my desk, bypassed the standard routing software, and dug into the raw diagnostic data of the server archives. I pulled the corrupted file from the previous night. I ran a manual decryption protocol, stripping away the audio files to isolate the raw geographical data points the tower had attempted to lock onto before the system crashed. The software spit out a single, heavily fragmented set of coordinates. The location was situated deep within the abandoned industrial sector, on the extreme eastern edge of the city. It was an area completely devoid of residential housing or active commercial businesses. I printed the coordinates, locked my workstation, and walked back out to my car. I retrieved a heavy tire iron from the trunk, placed it securely on the passenger seat, and drove toward the eastern sector. I followed the GPS coordinates on my phone until I reached a dead end at the edge of a massive, sprawling complex. The faded, rusted metal sign hanging precariously over the main loading dock indicated the building was formerly a meatpacking plant. The structure was immense, easily spanning an entire city block, surrounded by a high chain-link fence topped with coils of rusted razor wire. I parked my car in an overgrown alleyway, grabbed the tire iron, and approached the perimeter fence. I found a section where the chain link had been violently peeled back, creating a narrow gap large enough to crawl through. I slipped through the gap and walked across the cracked concrete of the loading dock. The steel roll-up doors were secured with thick chains, but a small pedestrian access door located on the side of the building was slightly ajar. I pulled the door open, the rusted hinges screaming loudly in the quiet night, and stepped inside the plant. I engaged the flashlight on my phone, sweeping the weak beam across the cavernous space. The main processing floor was massive. Hundreds of heavy steel meat hooks hung from an intricate network of rusted rails bolted to the ceiling. The hooks swung slightly in the draft, clinking together with a metallic chime. I walked slowly across the processing floor, keeping my grip tight on the tire iron. The space was completely hollowed out, stripped of any valuable machinery by decades of scavengers. I navigated through a maze of empty cold storage lockers and narrow, blood-stained corridors. As I reached the far end of the facility, pushing through a heavy set of swinging rubber doors, my flashlight beam illuminated a structure that completely defied the abandoned nature of the plant. Built directly into the center of a massive, empty storage locker was a small, self-contained room constructed from heavy cinder blocks. The steel door securing the room was pristine, lacking any rust, and locked with a heavy, modern brass padlock. Someone was actively using this room. I stepped up to the steel door, wedged the flat edge of the tire iron directly beneath the brass padlock, and applied my entire body weight to the metal bar. The locking mechanism fought back for a moment before the metal casing violently snapped, dropping the broken padlock onto the floor. I pulled the door open and stepped into the hidden room. The space was relatively small, heavily insulated with thick layers of acoustic foam bolted to the cinder block walls. A single, bare light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a harsh, yellow glare across the room. The contents of the room forced the air completely out of my lungs. Positioned in the corner of the room was a large plastic bin. The bin was overflowing with hundreds of personal documents. I walked over and pulled a handful of the papers from the pile. They were foreign passports, temporary work visas, and international identification cards. The documents belonged to people from dozens of different countries. I looked closely at the photographs printed on the identification cards. A profound, sickening wave of recognition washed over me. I had seen these faces before. They were the faces of undocumented immigrants who had vanished entirely from the city over the past decade. The local news stations constantly ran stories about missing day laborers, construction workers, and cleaning staff who simply disappeared without a trace, leaving their desperate families begging for answers. Resting on a wooden desk next to the plastic bin were neat, organized stacks of folded clothing. The garments were heavily stained with large, dark patches of dried blood. Sitting on the opposite end of the wooden desk was a small, boxy television set connected to a dusty DVD player and a VCR. Stacked neatly next to the electronics were dozens of unmarked VHS tapes. I set the tire iron down on the desk, reached out with trembling hands, and grabbed the tape sitting at the top of the stack. I pushed the plastic cassette into the VCR and pressed the play button on the front console. The television screen flared with white static before stabilizing into a grainy, low-resolution video feed. The camera was mounted on a tripod, recording a scene taking place inside this exact cinder block room. Sitting comfortably in a folding metal chair in the center of the frame was a man. He appeared to be in his late 60s, possessing short, neatly trimmed gray hair and a stern, weathered face. He was wearing a dark, highly formal uniform, adorned with brass buttons and official patches. Lying on the floor directly behind his chair was a young woman. Her wrists and ankles were bound tightly with thick plastic zip ties. She was weeping violently, her shoulders shaking as she struggled uselessly against the bindings. The man in the uniform ignored the sobbing woman completely. He looked directly into the camera lens, his expression entirely calm and devoid of any human empathy.
The system is entirely broken.
The man spoke, his voice deep, authoritative, and chillingly articulate.
The politicians open the gates and allow the colored filth to flood our streets. They dilute the purity of our nation. They drain our resources and pollute our neighborhoods. The official channels refuse to take the necessary action to clean the borders.
He paused, adjusting the collar of his uniform jacket with a precise, calculated movement.
If the government refuses to take out the trash, the responsibility falls to the patriots.
He continued, his tone remaining perfectly conversational.
I spent 30 years patrolling the checkpoints. I know how they cross. I know where they gather to look for under-the-table work. I offer them a ride, false promises of expedited citizenship paperwork, so they climb into the back of the van willingly. They are desperate, trusting animals.
He slowly turned his head, looking down at the bound woman weeping on the floor, before turning his gaze back to the camera.
I bring them here.
The man stated coldly.
To clear the world of the infection, as only the pure will inherit this land.
The man reached down out of the frame, lifting a heavy steel meat cleaver into view, and stood up from the chair. I violently slammed my hand against the power button on the television, killing the video feed before the atrocity could unfold on the screen. I backed away from the desk, my entire body shaking with horror. The scale of the violence was completely incomprehensible. From his uniform, I thought the man was a retired immigration or border enforcement officer. I frantically began searching the wooden desk, pulling open the heavy drawers, desperate to find any identifying information. Inside the bottom drawer, resting on a bed of velvet, was a wooden shadow box. The box contained the retired officer's official law enforcement badges, numerous commendation medals, and an engraved brass plaque detailing his 30 years of service to the Border Enforcement Agency. Tucked neatly beneath the brass plaque was a recent utility bill. The document bore the man's full legal name and a residential address located in a manicured suburban neighborhood on the western edge of the city. I memorized the address, shoving the utility bill deep into my pocket. I needed to call the federal authorities, so I got my phone and called the police, but then all I heard on the other side was the clicking sound. I turned away from the desk, reaching for my tire iron. The single light bulb hanging from the ceiling violently flickered and shattered, plunging the cinder block room into darkness. The temperature in the room aggressively plummeted, turning my exhaled breath into a white vapor. From the cavernous darkness of the main processing floor, outside the open door, a sharp, wet sound echoed loudly against the concrete. Click, click, click. The thing had found me. The rapid sound of wet tissue and scraping stones multiplied rapidly, echoing off the rusted meat hooks and the high ceiling. The creature was moving across the processing floor, dragging its massive, shifting bulk toward the hidden room. I grabbed the tire iron, engaged the flashlight on my phone, and sprinted out of the cinder block room. I aimed the beam across the vast floor. Dropping aggressively down from the high, rusted rails above was the entity. The massive amalgamation of bruised, severed limbs hit the floor with a sickening thud. The copper telephone wires binding the flesh whipped violently through the air, striking the metal pillars and sending sparks showering across the room. Dozens of jagged mouths opened simultaneously, producing a deafening, overlapping roar of the clicking dialect. The creature pulled its shifting mass forward, moving with a terrifying speed, blocking the main corridor leading back to the loading dock. I sprinted in the opposite direction, tearing wildly through the maze of lockers. The creature pursued me relentlessly, tearing down rusted shelving units and smashing through the rubber doors. I navigated the dark, labyrinthine plant purely on adrenaline, utilizing the narrow gaps between the heavy machinery to slow the massive bulk of the creature. I heard the snapping of bone and the tearing of wet flesh as it forcefully squeezed its shifting mass through the tight corridors, completely determined to maintain the connection it had established over the phone. I breached the final processing room, diving frantically under a rusted steel sorting gate, just as a thick loop of copper wire whipped aggressively through the air, entirely shattering the concrete wall directly behind my head. I scrambled to my feet, burst through the side pedestrian door, and threw myself out into the cold night air of the alleyway. I ran to my car, practically tearing the door handle off, and threw myself into the driver's seat. I slammed the transmission into gear and tore out of the place, my chest heaving violently as I watched the dark silhouette of the meatpacking plant fade in the rearview mirror. I parked my car in a brightly lit parking lot miles away from the plant, locking the doors and staring blankly at the steering wheel. I was safe for the moment, but the fundamental reality of the situation remained. Calling the federal authorities to arrest the retired officer would not save my life. The authorities could lock the killer in a concrete cell, but they could not arrest the creature. The creature was entirely bound to me. It seemed so, and it would relentlessly hunt me down wherever I went until it finished tearing me apart with those copper wires. A desperate, highly dangerous plan rapidly formed in my mind. If the creature targeted the person on the other end of the line, I simply needed to manipulate the connection. I drove my car across the city, navigating away from that part of the city and entering the quiet, perfectly manicured streets of the western suburbs. I parked 2 blocks away from the residential address printed on the utility bill. The neighborhood was completely silent, the large homes sitting comfortably behind perfectly trimmed hedges and expensive wrought iron fences. I walked quietly down the sidewalk until I found the correct house. It was a pristine 2-story brick home, featuring a manicured front lawn and a large bay window. The lights on the ground floor were actively burning, cutting brightly through the dark night. I approached the front porch, took a deep, steadying breath to calm my racing heart, and rang the doorbell. I waited for nearly a minute before the oak door slowly opened. Standing in the entryway, wearing comfortable casual clothes, was the man from the videotape. His face lined with deep wrinkles, but the cold, emotionless eyes were entirely identical to the monster I had watched on the screen.
Can I help you?
The officer asked, his deep voice carrying a note of polite irritation.
It is incredibly late.
I apologize for the intrusion, sir, I replied smoothly, projecting my most professional, authoritative dispatch voice. I am a supervisor with the municipal utility company. We are currently tracking a massive, localized surge in the underground copper telephone lines routing through this specific block. It is creating a severe fire hazard. I need to briefly inspect the primary connection junction inside your home to ensure the wiring is stable. The man frowned, his eyes narrowing slightly as he evaluated my appearance. I was wearing my dark, unmarked dispatch uniform, which closely resembled standard utility workwear.
I have not experienced any issues with my landline,
he stated suspiciously. The surge is silent, sir, I countered, maintaining eye contact. If the copper wiring in your walls overheats, the insulation will ignite entirely within the drywall. The inspection will take less than 2 minutes. If you prefer to refuse access, I will simply document the refusal and dispatch the fire marshal to cut the power to your property from the street. The threat of municipal inconvenience easily bypassed his strict paranoia. He sighed heavily, stepping back and pulling the door open.
Make it quick,
he ordered, gesturing toward the interior.
The main junction box is located in the utility closet down the hall, just past the guest bathroom.
Thank you, sir, I said, stepping over the threshold and walking into the pristine, heavily decorated home. I walked down the hallway, highly aware of the killer standing near the front door behind me. I opened the door to the small utility closet and stepped inside. I closed the door entirely, leaving myself in the cramped, dark space. After a moment, I went out and spotted a cordless landline receiver resting in its charging cradle on a small wooden table just outside the utility closet. I picked up the plastic handset, pressed the green connection button to open the channel, and brought the speaker to my ear. A heavy, suffocating static hissed through the tiny speaker, followed immediately by a sharp, wet sound. Click, click, click. I carefully set the receiver down on the flat surface of the wooden table. I closed the utility closet door and walked back down the hallway to the entryway. The officer was waiting impatiently by the front door, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. The junction is experiencing a severe frequency loop, I informed him, offering a polite, practiced nod while gesturing back down the hall. I need to run a remote diagnostic trace from the main municipal hub tonight to ensure the wiring does not overheat. I have left your landline receiver off the hook to maintain the active signal. You must leave that line completely open until tomorrow morning, so our technicians can continuously test the copper integrity. Do not hang up that phone under any circumstances.
Just make sure the gate is closed on your way out,
the killer muttered, glancing briefly with annoyance toward the open receiver on the table before pulling the front door wide and ushering me out onto the porch. I walked down the steps and down the sidewalk. I maintained a calm, steady pace until I rounded the corner and reached my parked car. I drove away from the suburbs, heading back toward the safety of my own apartment. I spent the entire night sitting awake on my sofa, staring at the walls, listening intently for the sound of wet flesh and scraping stones. The apartment remained completely silent. The following morning, I turned on the local news station while I drank my coffee. The lead anchor appeared on the screen, his expression somber as he reported breaking news from the western suburbs. The authorities had discovered the body of a retired, highly decorated border enforcement official inside his home early this morning. The anchor stated that the scene was incredibly chaotic and violent, completely baffling the forensic teams. The official cause of death was currently withheld from the public, but anonymous sources within the precinct indicated the victim had been brutally mangled, his limbs heavily lacerated, and violently bound together by hundreds of yards of thick, rusted copper telephone wire. I turned the television off and set my coffee mug down on the table. I am posting this detailed account here today to document the events of the last 48 hours. I returned to the dispatch center for my shift tonight. The sticky note is still sitting in the trash can under my desk. I firmly believe the entity has finally left me alone. It followed the signal. It found the monster responsible for the atrocities in the meatpacking plant, and it extracted its terrible revenge, so the connection has been permanently severed. I just desperately hope the phone on my desk never clicks again. Case File 3. I was 33 when my company sent me to Thailand for a business meeting in Bangkok. I ended up spending a month there, helping with partnership negotiations and relationship building meetings. And honestly, it was the best month of my life. Not just because of the country itself, but because our interpreter, the woman who accompanied us everywhere, was Molly. She was 28 at the time, beautiful and incredibly kind. I know. Everyone talks like that about the person they're in love with. But this was different. Molly and I got along immediately, and since I was the only person in our delegation who was both young and close to her age, we quickly found common ground. After 11 years of working my ass off, it felt strange not being able to focus on my job. But I won't drag the story out. I never imagined I'd end up getting married in a small Thai village. But since Mally's entire family lived there, it was easier to fly my widowed mother out as my only living relative. The happiest years of my life followed. Molly and I moved back to Chicago. I never gave up my job, and I couldn't walk away from the career I had spent years building. Mally wasn't happy about leaving her family behind, but she understood that there were far more opportunities for her in America, and if she had chosen me as her husband, then she was willing to come with me. I promised her that we'd go back every year to visit her parents. Unfortunately, things did not work out that way. In the 5 years we'd been married, we only managed to go back once. Mally wasn't happy about that. Between our daily lives, my job, our mortgage, and everything else, I was constantly working as hard as I could. It was the same story that year. The company was expanding into Detroit, and I had to travel there every week to inspect the construction sites and oversee the work being done. Because of that, there was no way we were going back to Thailand that spring. And I know, it sounds terrible, but there really wasn't anything I could do. I know I shouldn't have neglected my wife, but so many people were depending on me. So, in the middle of November, I sat Molly down and told her we wouldn't be able to visit her parents that spring. You could probably guess how she took it. She didn't yell, she didn't throw things. She wasn't visibly angry. She was sad, disappointed, and somehow that hurt far more than if she had thrown a pot at my head. I felt like absolute shit for days afterward, while Molly became completely distant toward me. At first, I figured she'd forgive me eventually, but days passed and she stayed just as distant. Then an entire week went by. That's when I finally realized that my life couldn't revolve around my work forever. I needed to make more time for my wife. So, I started planning something for us once a week. If I couldn't take her back to her hometown for weeks at a time, then at least I could make sure she didn't feel so alone here. And that's how we ended up at that little Thai restaurant. I honestly don't even remember where I found it, but I knew Molly would love the authentic Thai atmosphere, and the reviews were excellent. So, I made the reservation for Friday night, and we ate everything. Well, I should say, I tried everything Molly recommended. I had no idea what half of it was. Some of the meat dishes were so spicy, they felt like they were burning my lips off. And without giving it a second thought, I accepted every recommendation Molly made. By the time we headed home, I already knew the ride back was going to be rough. I practically burst into the apartment the moment we got home. My stomach was making noises like an old diesel engine. I thanked God we lived on the 3rd floor and not the 4th. I probably wouldn't have made it up another flight of stairs with a clean pair of pants. I tossed my car keys and apartment keys onto the small cabinet in the entryway. My coat went flying across the room while I was already unbuttoning my pants and running for the bathroom. As I rushed inside, I caught a glimpse of Molly's annoyed, almost pitying look. "I can't hold it," I yelled, half joking and half fighting for my life. "Then why did we go somewhere you can't handle?" Molly asked reproachfully. I didn't answer right away. I practically collapsed onto the toilet, clenching my teeth, and, well, I was trying to rid myself of things that were currently haunting my stomach. "Owen?" Molly called out like an irritated mother. "You still alive in there?" "Yeah," I groaned painfully. "Just give me a minute." I heard her taking off her knee-high boots. As much as she loved dressing nicely, the middle of December required warmer clothes. I knew Molly was upset, but she wasn't the type to openly complain. She'd retreat somewhere and pretend to occupy herself with something else. Our romantic evening was officially ruined, thanks to my stomach. "For fuck's sake," Molly cursed. She rarely talked like that, especially not that loudly, only when she was hanging on by her very last nerve. "What's wrong?" I called from my porcelain throne. "Nothing," she answered, quieter this time. "I left my phone downstairs." "Well," I groaned, "if it can wait a little, I'll go get it later." Molly didn't answer. I heard her muttering something under her breath, And yes, I knew she had every reason to be annoyed with me. But what was so important about that damn phone right now? I was fighting for survival in the bathroom.
It can't wait, Molly snapped. I wanted to talk to Ploy. She said she'd call me this morning.
Damn. That made me remember. Ploy was Molly's younger sister. She had exams coming up. I honestly couldn't even remember what she was studying in college. But from the conversations I'd overheard, the poor girl had been extremely nervous about them. I'll probably be done soon, I said, trying to pull myself together. Then I'll go get it from the car.
No need,
Molly replied coldly.
I'll get it myself.
I heard her putting her shoes back on and jingling the car keys. A moment later, there was a loud click and the apartment door closed behind her. I was literally sweating on the toilet, and I'm not exactly proud that my wife had to go downstairs in the middle of the night to get her stuff. But I was starting to feel like I was going to spend the entire night in that bathroom. Then, barely a minute later, I heard our apartment door click open. Was that Molly? Getting from the third floor down to the parking lot and back would take at least 3 or 4 minutes, even if the elevator didn't stop in any other floors. I knew that for a fact. I'd counted the seconds myself less than 10 minutes earlier, while sprinting upstairs with my stomach trying to kill me. I heard someone stomping through the entryway, angrily, heavy footsteps hitting the floor. You already back? I called from the bathroom. Couldn't find your phone? The footsteps suddenly sped up towards the living room, followed by a loud bang. It sounded like the bedroom door slamming shut. Oh, for fuck's sake, I muttered to myself from my porcelain prison. Nice job, Owen. I did everything I could to finish up as quickly as possible, not just because my legs were starting to go numb, but because it was beginning to bother me how angry Molly seemed to be. Or maybe she'd already gotten her phone and was talking to Ploy. Maybe that's why she wasn't answering. Either way, I needed to find out just how pissed she was. I probably spent another 5 or 10 miserable minutes trapped in that bathroom. But eventually, I started feeling like a glass of cold water and a hot shower could turn me back into a functioning human being. I finally got up from that toilet and stretched my stiff legs. And let's not talk about what happened in there. Trust me, you don't want to know. After washing my hands, I headed toward the kitchen, or at least, I tried to. The front door was standing wide open. The hallway lights were still on outside, but there wasn't a single person there. Did Molly leave it like this? The thought crossed my mind immediately. Damn, she really is pissed, I whispered. I walked over to the doorway and looked out into the hall, checking both directions. Nobody. The hallway was completely empty. Then, a strange sensation washed over me. A cool breeze brushed against my face and neck, almost like someone gently caressing me. A chill ran through my body, but it wasn't unpleasant. If anything, it felt comforting, familiar. The feeling reminded me of the early days of my relationship with Molly, when we were first falling in love. I didn't know what to make of it. After one glance down the empty hallway, I closed the apartment door. I finally made it to the kitchen and downed a huge glass of water. Every drop felt refreshing, not just for me, but for the stomach that had just crawled through hell. I splashed some water on my face over the sink as well, trying to wake myself up and work up the courage as a husband to go talk to my pissed-off wife. Pretty ordinary stuff, right? The bedroom door was closed. We didn't usually lock it unless, well, you know. I licked my lips and, feeling a little nervous, like a kid standing outside the principal's office, knocked on the door. "Molly, are you in there?" I asked gently. "I'm sorry about tonight, and everything else. That spicy duck or whatever it was really destroyed me, even though it tasted amazing." No answer, not a sound. Was Molly even in there? "Molly, honey," I said as I tried to open the door. Or at least, I tried. The door wouldn't budge. The handle moved slightly, but I couldn't get it open. What the hell? I stared at the closed door in surprise. Was Molly really that angry? Was she locking me out of our bedroom? "Molly, are you in there?" I asked, my voice becoming tense. "Are you seriously locking me out? Everything okay?" Again, nothing. I was starting to get irritated. There had been times when she'd gotten upset and refused to talk to me for a couple of days, but at least I'd still see her. Now we'd reached the point where I couldn't even get into my own bedroom. Was this the end of my marriage? For fuck's sake, I muttered quietly so she wouldn't hear me. Annoyed, I walked away from the locked bedroom door. Maybe it was better if I gave her some space. If she had time to think things over, she'd realize I hadn't done it on purpose. And I really was trying. At least a little. I couldn't think of anything else to do. After what I'd just gone through in the bathroom, a shower sounded like a good idea. Maybe by the time I got out, Molly would have calmed down too. A hot shower can work wonders. I'd even go as far as saying my body had almost forgotten the agony I'd gone through half an hour earlier because of the Thai food. Luckily, our walk-in closet connected to my home office, so I wasn't left without a change of clothes. To be honest, I didn't even try to coax Molly out of the bedroom. I'd talk to her after I was dressed and back in something comfortable. By the time I'd showered, gotten dressed, and cleaned myself up, nearly 40 minutes had passed since we'd gotten home. Midnight was creeping closer, and the bedroom door was still closed. There was only one thing left to do: flush the rabbit out of its hole. "Molly, sweetheart, please, let's not do this tonight." I knocked gently on the bedroom door again. "Say something. I'm starting to worry about you." Nothing. No response at all. The room sounded completely empty. But if it was empty, where was Molly? "Molly?" I asked, panic beginning to creep into my voice. "Molly, are you in there? Say something." Not a sound. Had she fallen asleep? Or was something wrong? "Molly!" I shouted, pounding hard on the door. I wasn't angry. I was confused. I genuinely didn't know what to think anymore. She could have yelled at me to shut up, told me to leave her alone, anything. But the silence, that dead silence, it made you start imagining the worst. "Molly," I yelled again, "if you don't answer me, I swear I'll break the door down. Are you okay? Are you hurt? Say something." Still nothing. My heart started pounding harder, and all I could think about was something had happened to her. I didn't know what, but something wasn't right. Something was very wrong. I braced myself and slammed my shoulder into the middle of the door, just like people do in the movies. Turns out, it's a lot easier in the movies. By the third attempt, my side felt like it was about to tear apart, and my neck was throbbing. I needed another way inside. I hurried into the kitchen, knowing there was a small toolbox under the sink. I'm no handyman, but I had a few basic tools. It didn't take long to find the small hammer I was looking for. I couldn't think of a better idea than smashing the lock. That would get me inside for sure. And if Molly needed an ambulance or anything else, I could help her. But I couldn't leave things like this. I needed to know she was okay. I brought the hammer down on the lock. It responded with a loud crack and splintering groan. But it didn't open. Motherfucker, I muttered. I swung again as hard as I could. There weren't many neighbors around, thankfully, but at that point, I didn't care whether they heard me or not. I had to get into that bedroom. I kept hammering at the door like a lunatic. Finally, something gave way. The lock snapped open. The door opened only a crack, and I stood there for a moment, feeling oddly victorious. "Molly, are you okay?" I asked as I pushed the door wider with the hammer. For some reason, the bedroom immediately gave me a bad feeling. At first, I couldn't figure out why. Then I realized the room was dark, completely dark. From the little bit of light spilling in from the living room, I could see that every blind was shut. The curtains were drawn tight. Everything else looked perfectly normal. "Molly?" I called softly into the darkness. No answer. I didn't dare walk straight into the room. Instead, I reached along the wall, searching for the light switch. I found it. Nothing happened. "What the hell?" I muttered, squinting up at the ceiling. The chandelier was gone. The wire still hung from above, but it looked like someone had ripped the entire fixture out of the ceiling. How? Even I needed a chair to reach it whenever I changed a bulb. I looked down. The shattered remains of the chandelier were scattered across the floor. Had it somehow fallen? "Who's in here?" I asked, my voice hardening. "Oh." A quiet voice answered. It was Molly, and yet it wasn't. I recognized her voice instantly, but something about it felt wrong, as if it was Molly, or something that knew how Molly sounded. "Molly? Honey, is that you?" I asked cautiously. "Come here," Molly said. Her voice sounded as though she was on the verge of tears. "Come to bed, please." I looked toward the bed. There was nobody there. The bed was neatly made exactly the way we'd left it that morning. "Here," she said again. "Come to bed." That's when I realized the voice wasn't coming from the bed. It was coming from underneath it. A chill ran down my spine. What the hell was under there? Something was talking to me in Molly's voice, but I couldn't honestly say it was her. And yet, something inside me wanted to move closer. I stepped into the darkness. The light from the living room stretched my shadow across the floor behind me as I cautiously approached the bed, keeping a safe distance. "Molly? Are you under there?" I asked quietly. I didn't dare bend down and look. I tightened my grip on the hammer and felt sweat coating my palm. "Owen, sweetheart," Molly's voice continued, almost seductively now. "Come here." I stared at the bed. My mouth had gone dry. My mind felt empty. Every sense was on high alert. The hairs on my arms stood up. Then I saw it. near one of the bedposts. At first, it looked like a thick black braid, dense, sticky, slowly sliding beneath the bed as if someone were pulling it. At the same time, I heard something scratching. Softly at first, then faster, louder, like a dog desperately trying to dig its way out from behind a door. I swallowed hard and took a step backward. The hammer felt glued to my hand.
I said, come here.
The voice from under the bed snapped. It sounded like Molly, and something else. A second voice mixed with hers. What the fuck? I whispered, backing toward the doorway. But that was only the beginning. A long, thin hand appeared near a corner of the headboard. It slowly crawled out and wrapped itself around one of the bed legs. Then, another hand emerged near the middle of the bed, twisted, bent, with far too many fingers. Its nails scraped across the hardwood floor. Then, a third arm appeared, a fourth, long, thin, wrong. They rose up over the far side of the bed and slammed down onto the neatly arranged blankets. For a second, I froze. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. Then, survival instincts took over. I backed out of the room as fast as I could. I pulled the bedroom door shut behind me, even though I knew it probably wouldn't accomplish a damn thing. I kept retreating until I reached the light of the living room, breathing hard, still clutching the hammer, as if that piece of metal could somehow protect me from whatever was hiding in that bedroom. I just stood there, frozen, staring at the half-open bedroom door from across the room. My hands were shaking. I thought I might pass out. What the fuck was in there? Where was Molly? What had happened to her? Molly's voice drifted from the bedroom, soft, inviting.
Come back, please. I've been waiting for you.
I struggled to catch my breath. Sweat ran down my back. I wanted to run as far away as possible.
Owen, sweetheart.
The voice whispered.
Come here.
Something moved inside the darkness. I couldn't see it clearly, but it was large and fast. Then, every light in the apartment began flickering at once. The bulbs flashed wildly. It looked like the power could die at any second. I had to get out. I sprinted toward the front door. The moment my hand grabbed the handle, the power went out. Luckily, I'd lived here for years. One quick twist and the door flew open. Behind me, I heard the bedroom door slam against the wall. Then, something thundered through the living room at an impossible speed, coming straight for the hallway. But I was already outside, running toward the elevator. Thankfully, the hallway lights were still on. When I reached the elevator, I mashed the call button like a maniac. I kept glancing back. The lights out there had started flickering too. Then the elevator chimed. The doors slid open, and I would have jumped inside if I hadn't crashed directly into Molly. She was standing there, staring down at her phone as she stepped out of the elevator. I nearly knocked her flat on her back. "What the fuck, Owen?" she shouted angrily and shoving me away. "Shh," I hissed, breathing hard. "There's something in the apartment." "What?" Molly asked, suddenly alarmed. "What's in the apartment?" "I don't know," I said, my voice on the verge of breaking. "But it sounds like you." A strange expression flashed across Molly's face. Something I can't properly describe. Something I can't explain. But in that moment, I got the feeling she knew exactly what had been inside that apartment. Case File 4. It was simply there on one humid morning about 6 weeks ago. I walked out of my house, looked right on the way to my car, and there it was, a black square in the middle of the street. I thought it was a strange box or something. Thinking nothing of it, I went off to get lunch, but it was still there when I returned, and this time, the neighborhood kids that usually collectively played in the yard to my house's left were now instead off to the right, circled around the black square. They were talking, laughing, and poking at it with sticks. Something didn't seem right about the scene, so I got out of my car and stood for a moment watching. What was wrong here? It hit me. They weren't poking at it. They were poking into it. One of the local teenagers was sitting on the porch behind me, so I knew the kids were being looked after. If it was some strange prank or something, well, I'd hear about it later. I headed back inside and returned to writing that day's story. Around 8 in the evening, someone began knocking on our front door. 2 of my roommates were in their rooms with the doors open, but we were all playing an online game together, so we ignored it and hoped the guy in the room downstairs would get it. He either didn't hear it or didn't care, so we sat there listening to the pounding and knocking for about 15 minutes before one of my roommates logged off the game and stormed down to the front door. I heard, "What the hell do you want? None of us are parked in your goddamn spot. We never park in your spot." That didn't sound good. I left my computer and slid down the hallway to see what was going on. They'd told me stories about Bill and how he insisted that one section of the sidewalk was for his food truck. Apparently, he'd go around at literally any time of day or night, knocking on every single door in the neighborhood until he found the offender. This time, Bill was looking not for a car owner, but for the perpetrator of the black square prank. After much arguing, he finally moved on to the next house, but I couldn't go back to playing our game. Instead, I wandered out under evening orange and headed down the street. The black square was odd. Its angle seemed to be changing to match me, and I moved my head back and forth a few times rapidly to confirm that it always looked exactly square from any angle. Anton was sitting in his open garage in a lawn chair as I approached. He handed a man a bag, pocketed a stack of cash, and coughed and leaned back. The stranger hurried away without looking at me. It was not an unusual sight. Standing in Anton's driveway, which ran straight at the black square and Bill's house beyond, I asked, "Hey, what is this thing?" "No idea, man," he responded, "but it's got me on edge. It's just been there all day. I thought maybe somebody was scoping me out, but it doesn't do nothing." I didn't want to get too close to it, so I picked up a stick. Kids were messing with this earlier, right? Did anything happen? Nah. It was strange. There seemed to be some sort of scaling perspective at work. As I moved closer to the square, it grew larger in my sight than the change in distance warranted. Far away, the effect had been imperceptible, but up close, it was extremely unsettling. It felt almost as if the black square was looming up to encompass me and might even leap out at any moment. It was becoming increasingly obvious that this was no prank. The sides were exactly equal in length from what I could see, and absolutely nothing showed or reflected on its surface. I'd seen Vanta Black nanofabric in person once before, and that super black material had definitely left an impression on me. It had felt like staring into absolute void, and I had that same feeling now. The only difference was that my stick encountered no resistance as I moved it forward. I took one step. The stick still moved freely ahead. Was it past the threshold yet? It was disturbingly impossible to tell, because the square always seemed to be facing me, so I couldn't tilt left or right and get a look from the side. The square also got bigger, faster than it should have with each step, so I couldn't get a good idea of exactly where it began and ended. Worst of all, the forward perspective had no landmarks and no shadows. It felt as if I was inside a television show and reaching forward into a CGI background. The studio lights off-screen were still lighting the stick, and I was reaching into something that didn't really exist. I swung my branch left and right. There were no edges to strike either. The pointed end traversed from ultra-black to the green of Bill's lawn and back with no resistance. It was then I truly understood that we were in trouble. "Hey, Anton?" "What up?" He was usually one to play it cool, but I could tell by a subtly concerned expression that I must have looked very strange standing in front of complete nothingness. How to phrase it? Let's make sure nobody goes near this. He nodded and gave a nervous laugh. We didn't have any sort of housing association or community building, so it would really be up to word of mouth. Bill was 2 houses past ours now, still knocking on doors, and he was doing a decent accidental job of warning everyone. A few neighbors had come out onto their lawns to stare at the thing, and I saw Ideal emerging one lawn over. While studying the black square from afar, she shivered and pulled her headscarf a little closer. I smoothed down my shirt reflexively as she approached. She stopped on the sidewalk just short of Anton's driveway. "What is the square?" We just shook our heads. "You call police?" she asked, looking at me. Anton leaned back in his seat and watched me. Put on the spot, all I could say was, I don't think so." She was visibly confused. "Why not?" Anton snickered. "Cops don't come here, girl." "Police don't come this area?" "Nah, they do. But trust me, you don't want 'em. They don't come here to help." "Oh." She looked down at the ground, then over to the black square, and then to her front door. She departed without a word. The rest of the neighbors began to emerge from their homes as Bill pissed them off in sequence, but we did not meet or talk beyond the distant glances of confusion and confirmation. I didn't like that strange square in the street, not one bit, but there wasn't much to do about it. A few people were taking pictures, so I went back inside and put my phone on the charger to do the same. My roommates and I locked the house up tight that night. We couldn't see the black square from any of our windows, but the mere knowledge of its presence was like a chill in the air. I was the night owl of the 4 of us, and when the others went to bed, I quietly stacked boxes full of junk from the basement to block the windows, just in case. In the morning, nobody commented in approval of the boxes, but neither did they take them down. I stepped outside to confirm that the anomaly was still there. This time, I took pictures. I'd seen more than my share of movies and shows about creepy anomalies, but it was another thing having one actually show up outside my house. In person, there's a balance of risk versus curiosity, and there was nothing we could do about the square without endangering ourselves. We couldn't get too close to it, because who knew what would happen, and we certainly couldn't go inside it. So it sat there, and, in large part, we ignored it in our day-to-day lives. But there's also another kind of risk, the unknown, and the stress effects on your community and on your health. Each morning for a week, I would look to my right at that eerie black square and wonder if I was being watched. Or worse, was it some kind of hole from somewhere that might let in horrific entities beyond our understanding? Or hell, even just basic clawed creatures we could understand would be horrifying. A simple wolf or bear on the loose on our street would have been an emergency warranting help. And here we were with the possibility of literally anything appearing at any time. On a random night that about 8 people were over to play board games, Ideal asked again if I would call somebody. This time, I agreed. But who? And how? I did find some numbers for 2 local news channels. I sent in my pictures, but they laughed at me and said they looked photoshopped. I insisted that no, it was literally just a black square, and they told me to call back when I had something scarier. The military was an obvious answer too, but how does one call the military? I didn't exactly have a phone number for the military. Each night for a week, I waited on hold with various desks, bases, and institutions, repeating my story verbatim each time. A strange anomaly has appeared in our neighborhood, and I need somebody to come take a look at it. Most secretaries hung up on me immediately, but I finally got one that laughed. He asked, "Watching some X-Files tonight?" I sighed. "Look, I've been trying to contact someone about this for a week. Let's say, hypothetically, that I'm serious. Is there some sort of division or group for that?" "Let me just call Area 51, buddy. They'll take care of you." "Come on. There has to be some guy that takes weird phone calls and checks them out, right?" "Oh, that's no fun. Fine, I'll give you the number." I had it. Finally, I had it. The next conversation I had was promising, and a military jeep showed up the next morning. Idle texted me when she saw it park on the street, and I hurriedly went outside to greet. One man, apparently. He was only slightly older than me, and he stood staring at the black square with a haunted gaze. As I finally got his attention, he turned his head to look at me and said, "Motherfuck?" "Right?" I pointed down the street at the black square. "That thing's been sitting there like that for a week and a half." Finally prompted to move, he went to the back of his Jeep, pulled out a tripod and a camera, and set it up facing the anomaly. Watching him, I asked, "So you're going to call in the big guns, right? Someone will take care of this?" His only answer was a glance, and then he got in his Jeep and drove off, leaving the equipment running. That was progress, I told myself. Somebody was aware of the issue now, and somebody was on it. Small consolation as the days wore on. One of the neighbors boarded up their windows, and then everyone did. Nobody asked the first house to do it if they had seen or heard something scary. We just did it. That day we went to the hardware store, endured the awkward process of explaining what we were doing to the overly helpful employees, and then took our boxes of nails and stacks of wood and began hammering into the window frames. I winced at the first one that went awry and damaged the wall, but I figured our security deposit was long gone anyway. We kept the curtain between the glass and the wood so that the landlord wouldn't notice on a casual drive-by, although he would certainly see that the entire neighborhood had suddenly acquired bars and boards. If the area went to shit, would he lower our rent? Doubtful. Then, my roommates and I got drunk together, for the first time in months. The neighbors were doing the same thing, in their boarded-up houses and on their lawns, and eventually we had a sort of block party going. It was an eerie thing, all being connected and bonded by a common threat, but being unable to mention that threat, even as it loomed in the distance at all times. There was nothing we could do about it, so mentioning it publicly was impolite. As dusk deepened and someone started a bonfire in their backyard, I almost couldn't stand the pressure of what was happening. That thing might turn deadly and kill us all any time, but I wasn't even allowed to mention it without pissing people off. Boarding up our houses, we were all reacting to it. We were all aware it existed, and we all knew everyone else knew too, but we couldn't talk about it. A weird defensiveness was emerging among the conversations I overheard. This was our street, and none of us could afford to move away. Therefore, the black square had to be harmless. There were even people talking about the idea that there was nothing wrong at all, and that talk was growing. Agitated, I left the block party. I still wanted to drink, but angrily now, so I went to the nearest bar and sat. By pure chance, to my left was the soldier who'd set up the camera equipment. He was half sloshed already, and he looked sidelong at me while holding the bar to keep himself up. He laughed darkly. "Oh, it's you." It was almost a relief to see that he was still in town. "You guys going to do anything about the Black Square once you collect enough info?" He sat taller and focused his bloodshot eyes on me. "Guys?" "Yeah, your team or whoever?" "It's just me." "Oh, well, what about the higher-ups?" He downed another shot that had just been delivered. "Higher-ups? My whole department got cleaned out by the new administration to cut costs or something. I'm the only guy in my entire building." My beer arrived, and I took a sip of it while trying to fully understand what he meant. "Like, temporarily? Are you waiting on new hires?" He gave an exaggerated shrug. "It's been 7 months, and nobody talks to me or tells me anything. I just get a paycheck automatically. No emails, no nothing. I'm thinking maybe they just forgot to transfer me when they got the rest. I don't think anybody even knows I'm still there." That was an off-putting thing to hear. "Then what do we do about the Black Square?" He gave a long, drunk belly laugh. "Brother, there are 47 anomalies in Ohio alone, and I'm the only person in this state left in the department that handles that shit. Just be happy that yours isn't making people crazy or changing your muscle tissue into acid while you sleep." "What? Does that happen?" He stared forward at the venue's long mirrored back wall for a moment, unmoving, except for the muscles in his jaw tightening as if he was grinding his teeth. After a tick, he suddenly reached over and clapped me on the back. "Nothing so dramatic as all that. I'm just playing." He got up, threw some cash on the bar, and began to stumble away. "Wait," I called after him. "What's your plan for the Black Square?" "Plan?" he yelled back on his way out the door. "You are on your own, brother." I skirted through the crowd and pushed out into the night. "And what about the 46 other anomalies?" He just kept walking and soon became small in the distance. Was it really possible that there was nobody manning the defenses for things like this? Were we simply open to danger with no one to respond? Was the only working plan to hope that nothing bad would happen? What the hell kind of plan was that? I returned home even more agitated than before. It was about 3 weeks after the appearance of the anomaly that those that insisted the Black Square was harmless became the majority. We'd been able to complain about it, make jokes, and watch it fearfully before that afternoon, but the winds changed, and I immediately found myself on the outside with no warning. If I glanced suspiciously at the Black Square, someone would deride me for it. If I tried to measure it to see if it was growing at all, someone would come out on their lawn and tell me to stop and that I was wasting my time. By the 4th week, those reactions became veiled threats. Bill was standing out on the sidewalk the first day of that 4th week. I had just come home from playing a card game elsewhere, and he approached me rather angrily. "Stop causing trouble," he said without sugarcoating it. Me? He was a large man in multiple ways, and I took a step back warily. I'm just not willing to accept that the incredibly odd anomaly in the middle of our street is safe. "The Black Square isn't causing any trouble," he growled. "You're the problem here, pissing people off, going against the grain. People want to sleep soundly, and they can't do that if you fill their heads with nonsense dangers." "If it's nonsense," I asked, "then why are your windows boarded up?" He balled a fist. "'Cause that's how it's always been around here. Everybody does it and always has." "The hell are you talking about? It was just last month that..." He slugged me in the stomach. I backed away. There was nothing left to say. I understood exactly what was happening. He glared from the sidewalk until I went inside and closed the door behind me. 2 mornings later, screaming erupted from a few houses down. 9 of us rushed out of our houses with makeshift weapons, only to find that the danger had been the night before. Someone's window had been broken, and the wood beyond had been clawed mightily by something that had left traces of azure ichor behind. I thought that certainly it would be undeniable now. It was obvious that something had come out of that black square and tried to get into a house. The only reason the single father and his 2 girls were alive. They'd boarded up their windows like everyone else. "See," I said to those gathered, "I told you it's dangerous." But the single father in question shook his head. "Of course you'd say that. How'd you do it?" I began backing away almost instantly as all eyes turned on me. "What?" "Yeah, likely what happened. What tool did you use to make those marks? And what is that blue shit? Is it toxic? Did you put Ethan's girls in danger by throwing toxic blue sludge on their house?" Ethan added, "And you'll pay for that window, too." The hell is wrong with you people? I clutched my bat and continued moving backwards. Edel came out of her house then and asked some of the others in the group what was going on in Somali. They backed off, and Bill and Ethan shot me hateful glances. On the way back to my place, Anton shook his head as I crossed his driveway. "Gonna get yourself killed, boy?" Whispering, I asked, by insisting that the physics-defying anomaly in our street is possibly dangerous? Just saying. I sit in front of this thing all day, every day, and it freaks me the hell out, but I don't say nothing to anyone else around here. Neighbors are more dangerous than that thing. Get it? Keep your head down. I mulled over his words for another few days, while the attitude in the neighborhood became openly hostile. More claw marks and strange azure liquids appeared during each night, and Bill started enforcing what he called his right to open carry by walking around on the sidewalks with an automatic rifle slung over his shoulder. And then Ethan started doing it too. It made me tense as hell, but they'd often talked about gun responsibility, and part of me was glad to have weapons around, given that something was probably coming out of the black square each night and trying to get into our houses. At 4 in the morning on the first night of the 5th week, I heard loud banging on the front door. For 20 minutes, I listened to someone pounding and yelling outside until one of my roommates shouted from his bed, "Fuck off, Bill. We don't have to answer the door for you. We're not parked in your goddamn spot." The knocking went silent. My other roommate called from his room. That's the first time he's ever actually just gone away. At that, I sat up starkly in my bed. I knew. In that keening instant, I knew. Something had happened out there. Some spark. Perhaps the unseen creature had finally gotten someone. Perhaps it had gotten one of the neighborhood children. I grabbed my baseball bat and put on my tennis shoes. Other than that, I was only in shorts and a t-shirt, but there was no time. Running into the dark hallway that connected our rooms, I whispered, "Get your gun out." "What?" my roommate asked. "Get your goddamn gun ready," I practically hissed. "They're coming for us." There was a crash of glass and the sound of boards being ripped off in the back of the house to punctuate what I'd said, and I heard my roommate jumping up and fumbling around with the case that held his gun. My other roommate just said, quietly and fearfully, "They're not coming for us. They're coming for you." In the dark, I heard his door close and lock. This was no movie situation. I knew this would end very quickly between untrained civilians, and I knew I was at a big disadvantage. If the windows hadn't been boarded up, I would have escaped that way, but I was forced into a corner. I only had knowledge of the terrain and the advantage of surprise. Using long steps to avoid the parts of the floor that creaked, I moved out into the board game room, and a big silhouette moving around the corner became a wide-open target for my bat. I swung without restraint and as hard as I could. I'd never tried to kill anyone before, but I was amazed at how lethal my strength felt when the restraints were off. The bat snapped in half on Bill's head, and he fell to the floor. He limply tried to resist, but I pulled at his rifle while screaming obscenities, and he gave it up while groaning on the floor and whimpering about his head bleeding. I'd won, but unfortunately, there were 7 more silhouettes behind him. Ethan was among them, and I saw his face by moonlight as they dragged me out into the street. "This asshole nearly killed Bill," he shouted. "Proof positive he's the one behind the attacks. You came into my house with guns," I screamed at them. "You goddamn psychopaths." There were 20 other people out there already, many sticking to their own lawns. By the light of the full moon, they watched fearfully. Some of them asked if what I was saying was true. Ethan yelled over me, "He'll say anything to trick people. Fake news." Fake? They were still holding my arms, but I struggled. "This is ridiculous. You've all got guns and you literally just broke into my house in the middle of the night." "Fake. Lies." Ethan insisted to the neighbors we passed as they kept pushing me and dragging me. As we passed Adele on her lawn, I realized where we were going. She ran forward and kicked at Ethan. "I did not leave my country just for you to be the same." One of the men stayed behind to keep her restrained, and I nearly got away because of the distraction. Unfortunately, they caught me and continued moving me toward the black square. Even by moonlight, it was starkly visible. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan snarled. "You know, you monster. I can't let you live after what you did to my little girl." I could see one of the wooden barricades among his windows had failed. Something had broken its way inside, and red blood was mixed with the azure pools usually left behind. "So you're going to try to kill me by throwing me inside the black square?" I asked loudly so that everyone around could hear. "How does that make any sense if you insist it's not dangerous? That I'm the one who somehow orchestrated these attacks in the night?" One of the neighbors screamed, "Stop trying to get out of this. Fake news." She turned and insisted to someone else that I was a liar. Getting rid of him will stop the attacks. They were lost. I'd known it, but it was only now that I truly accepted that I was not in a neighborhood surrounded by peers. I'd been living in hostile territory, surrounded by enemies for weeks, and they'd become delusional because of their own fear. Living with fear every single day and being unable to do anything about it had turned their fear to anger, and now anger had become violence directed at the only target they could actually reach, their neighbor. On that first night of the 5th week, they kicked me forward and pointed their guns at me, forcing me to walk into the black square, the unknown source of their fear. It had come to us from somewhere else, but it was now the desperate void at the center of our lives. It was our heart. I'd never felt more sharp and aware. Adrenaline seared fire through my every nerve as I kept moving forward away from the guns at my back. The dark square expanded rapidly in my sight, but then grew more slowly as I came nearer than ever before. It asymptotically filled half of the sphere of what I could see. I kept waiting to pass the threshold, like a door, to see the sides I'd tried to find with sticks and ropes over the last 5 weeks, but it never came. I kept pressing forward only to find myself still half in the world I knew and half in the darkness, until I turned around and saw Ethan and the others very far behind me. My brain struggled to process the shape or curve of what was happening, but I had the distinct sensation that I could keep walking forever, and the black square would remain a giant sail pressed against half of me. Except I knew there was an unseen drop-off, and perhaps that was the key. Perhaps the door was actually down, and the black square we could perceive was merely a higher dimensional perspective on it. I got down on my knees and hands and began to crawl. I couldn't afford to fall accidentally. "Don't bother," Ethan shouted in the distance. "You're going over. You're not getting out of this." There it was. I could feel the edge. Here, the black square was almost exactly half of what I could see around me. Directly above, to the left, to the right, and down. The paved street far beyond Bill's and Anton's houses, Part of the street I'd stood upon many times coming the other direction now met sheer void, but it wasn't dark. Light had always been coming up from below. There'd just been nothing for it to reflect from, so that we could see it. Light came up from below now, illuminating my face, my eyes, my mind. It was a ghastly light, certainly not ever a color that had graced our world before, and I could see everything by the cast of its deep glare. I'd never seen that color with the rods and cones in my eyes before, but I knew what it was. If you could open a door into the mind and observe the hues within, if you opened that door into the mind of a person being tortured with perfect and exacting skill, you would see the chroma of pain, not just the feeling of it or the idea of it in thought, but the blood of the concept, the core, as a brushstroke on existence. For some reason, I laughed, but I did not smile. I stood and began to walk back. Ethan held his assault rifle forward. "Don't you come back here. Don't you fucking do it." I just shook my head. The other men behind him raised their guns too, but they were waiting on him. I didn't slow. I couldn't. As I moved toward Ethan, I told him, "You're human, Ethan. Fundamentally capable of good, or just neutrality, of cooperation, of peace." The words spilled directly from my raw brain and into the night air. "You are not like what's over that edge. Take a look for yourself. You'll understand." The barrel of his weapon glimmered darkly by moonlight, but the square behind me was blacker. "What do you mean?" he asked after a moment, the strain of oncoming terror dampening his tone. I think he saw the look in my eyes. Some small fraction of what I'd seen had to still have been lingering in my irises, like a rotting reflection gone bad. What's in there? What's over that edge? I couldn't really think at that moment. I put my forehead to the barrel of his rifle and grasped for the trigger under his hands. "Please." He pulled away in fear. "You're crazy." They were no longer a threat now. I drifted past them and back to my house, where one of my roommates peered out his door and apologized, and the other finally finished finding his ammunition. "Danger's past, don't bother," I murmured, before going into my room and sitting on my bed. It took 6 days for my brain to develop a coping mechanism. For 6 days, I sat and stared at any blank white wall I could find. It was eye bleach in a way, because it had every color and none. After 6 days, I felt nothing, and that was my release. To scab and scar over what had happened to my mind, my brain had amputated my emotions, and good for that. I would feel horrible at the loss of love and joy and friendship and companionship, but I can't, and that's better than feeling what I witnessed over that edge. Bill was back from the hospital by then, and feeling rather sheepish. A neighborhood watch had been set up, and armed men were taking turns guarding the black square, around which they'd built a wall out of bricks and cement. They knew that nobody would be coming to help. No police, no military, no government. We were on our own, a fact which made Idil sad as she talked to me about the home she'd left, where it had been exactly the same in her village. "This is humans," I told her. "Sometimes we do better, for a little while. Sometimes we don't." She didn't have a chance to reply before Bill came up and sat carefully down next to me on my porch. He rubbed his bandaged head and said, "Sorry about what happened last week." I kept watching my armed neighbors around the black square. "It doesn't matter." "It does, though," he muttered, looking downcast. "We could have killed you." "It doesn't matter," I said again. He swallowed audibly and then asked, "What you seeing there? Think the neighborhood'll go to shit now?" Now? It amazed me that it was right there. It was right there, just 100 feet away. We were alive and standing here breathing air and eating food and having conversations just 100 feet away from that. "It was always here, Bill. The only thing that changed 6 weeks ago is that we can see it now. We don't talk much anymore. The neighborhood is quieter than before. We just sit and wait for the inevitable, each day and each night. The black pit is among us, lurking in open sight, and one day it will spill forth ungodly hordes I don't need to describe, because you already know what they look like. Sometimes we do better. Sometimes we don't. These files have now been returned to the archive. If you'd like to hear more case files, subscribe and return tomorrow.